Hey everybody, welcome back to the Badgerland Birding Podcast, bringing you birding news and stories from the Badger State and beyond. Today, we're super excited to be here with Stuart Winter, British birder and writer. How's it going, Stuart?
Good afternoon, your time. Good evening, my time. Um, Going well. Been birding today, and it's nice to relax this evening. There's no big soccer games on, and I use the dreaded word
Well, you
soccer.
said the word that you're not supposed to say if you're
The
from
word
Europe.
I said I'd never say. Um, but yeah, there's no football games. My team, Tottenham Hotspur, I'm not actually in the stadium at the moment, but they're playing tomorrow night in the Europa League.
It would have been epic if you were just in the stadium. You're like, this is where I come to think about and talk about birds.
To be honest, just the stadium, they've reconfigured it to make it it's a really fantastic stadium. They play American football here, so we have sort of two games a year that the NFL come over, and the pitch turns over, so you've got a grass football pitch and a gridiron underneath it, and a synthetic gridiron. But I've sat there before, and there's a big reservoir on the east side of the stadium, and you can see gull roosts and sort of really unusual birds like Mediterranean gull have flown across while I've been sort of sitting there. So it's a you can do my two favourite things in life: birding and football.
That's fantastic. The birding never stops. I was at an American football game, and for all those listening in America, as a respect to Stuart, I'm going to call it American football for the duration of our conversation. Um, I was at a game in Lambeau Field for the Green Bay Packers, and a couple of rock pigeons flew over, so I got to add a list for that. So the birding never stops, no matter what else you're doing.
What's with the
No.
Viking sweatshirt?
Oh, this is the most comfortable sweatshirt that I
Oh,
own.
come
Sitting
on.
here. But
Not
how do you like
cool.
the biggest week in American birding hat?
You're full of interesting combinations today. We had another Zoom and he was wearing a Oilers jersey and then a Packers hat. So he's all over the map with his NFL apparel. But Stuart, what is the British birding scene like? Because me and Ryan have never been there. We don't really know
No,
anything about it. I know some of the birds there, some of their vocalizations, but aside from that, we really don't know too much.
it's it's exciting. Unfortunately, I mean, I start off with the negatives. We're a small island. I mean, we could drop into Texas many times over. We're a very compact island. I mean, the population is officially 68, 69 million. Um, and wherever you go, you're driving in traffic. So, I mean, that's the big bugbear I have now that I don't travel very far. I don't particularly like driving on British roads. Um, that has had its impact on sort of twitching as it was back in the 80s, back in the time when I was really sort of flying around, sort of not the whole country, but a good part of the country chasing rare birds. Um, they brought in speed cameras, our fuel, I would say petrol prices, astronomical compared to in the United States. And so for me, that sort of slowed down my enjoyment of twitching, but it continues. I mean, the amount of birds that are found every day. We have a fantastic two major bird dissemination services, Rare Bird Alerts and Bird Guides, are putting out rare bird news all the time. I mean, it's remarkable the amount of rare birds that are found in the UK. And I think that's one of the major things that, I mean, the breeding population of UK birds is 220, 230 species. The actual British list is sort of hovering around sort of 630 at the moment. They keep on splitting and lumping. So we've lost a few red poles, and it looks
Mm.
like we will lose the hooded crow. That's going to be lumped with back with the carrion crow again. Um, but yeah, there's rare birds coming through all the time. I mean, we're most probably strategically the best placed island in the world because we're sort of with the near Arctic and only the Atlantic Ocean between us and your part of the world, and then we're on the edge of Europe, so and the European flyaway birds coming down from Scandinavia, and we get a lot of birds coming in from Siberia. This autumn's been fantastic for Siberian warblers. We had the second only power-legged leaf warbler. the previous one was found dead. So this one created quite a twitch. There were sort of several thousand people turned up at up on the Yorkshire coast to see it. And then not on the tail of that, there was an eastern crown warbler found up in Scotland and a two-barred greenish warbler. So these are really super rare Phylloscopus warblers. And that's continued. Whereas 12 months ago, we had the fallout from Hurricane Lee. I don't know if you remember it, but basically it came up the east coast and then did a sort of dogleg across the Atlantic, and we had the sort of greatest ever fallout of North American birds. I think it was like 99 individual land birds of sort of 23 species, and we had our very first Canada warbler,
Wow.
um, second bay-breasted warbler, third or fourth magnolia warblers. Yeah, it was just absolutely an amazing time, and yeah, it just shows you sort of 12 months. Last year was an American influence birding period, and this year
You're
we've
welcome.
had a nation series. So that's it. I mean, it shows you what the birding scene is like, that people are picking those birds up all the time. On a much lower, I'd say on a more sort of parochial level, um, birders are really into their local patches. They're the people who actually find birds. People are going out, and where I live as about as far from the sea as you can get in the UK. I live just sort of 40 miles north of London, in most probably the fastest growing area of real estate that you can find. And I was out at my local catchment when I was a child a few weeks ago, and it's just houses and houses and houses sort of going up all the time. But fortunately, one of the local birders found a redback shrike, which is a really good bird. I mean, it turns up in my county, Bedfordshire, perhaps once every 5 years or so. And this one stayed around for sort of 2 to 3 weeks. So that's been the local highlight of late.
So it sounds like the birding community is like pretty tight knit. Like you guys have just a couple rare bird, systems. I feel like ours is kind of patchy, where there's all
Yeah,
these like little organizations doing things, and you kind of have to go to a bunch of
yeah,
different places to get all your information, which is a little unfortunate that it feels like you kind of have to search more. That's not like
yeah.
one centralized body.
Well, they're both paid for services. I mean, in our county, we have a really, really good WhatsApp
Mhm.
messaging group. And a bird only has to fly through Bedfordshire and it gets picked up. I mean, one of the interesting things is that Bedfordshire is a small county, sort of 45 miles north to south and sort of 20 miles east to west. But it's also the home of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. And because of that, there's a lot of people that work there that are really keen birders. So we've got some excellent field birders who work for the RSPB. So they're picking up things all the time, and that information is then shared out on our WhatsApp group. So every sort of 20 minutes or so, something comes in that someone's seen somewhere or another.
That's pretty wild. How long does it take to get from one side to the other?
Do
Like
you know?
north to south,
I mean,
east to west?
I lived here 60 years, and I've never gone completely north to south. In as much as I mean, I passed through it, but to actually bird watching up in the north of Bedfordshire, I may as well sort of bird watch on the moon. I mean, I joke, and I don't wish to sound sort of, being sort of a bit of one-upmanship, but I've done far more proper bird watching in the States over the years than I have in the UK. I mean, I've been over there for holidays and sort of had, have 2 weeks there and really sort of, get out bird watching, dawn to dusk. Over here, it's such impoverished land. I mean, I can imagine there must be places in the States that sort of, in the sort of in the prairie lands or something like that, where there's very few birds, and it feels like I'm living there. But going back to answer your question, I mean, it would take about sort of in heavy traffic, it would take sort of 2 hours.
Mhm.
Um, Light traffic, you may be able to do it in 45 minutes, but driving in the UK is most probably, I think every American friend I have whoever's come over here is absolutely shocked at how it's sort of just like driving through Manhattan.
Oof.
wherever you
Yeah,
go.
that doesn't sound good.
But on
Yeah.
the other side of the road, right?
Oh, very much so. Yes,
Yeah, I
yeah.
don't think I could do that. That'd
No,
be
you
so
learn very
weird.
quickly. I mean, I don't know how true this is, but there was a TV program back many years ago, and it sort of suggested that the fact that we drive on the left, and the reason why we drive on the left of the road, I don't know if you know, that it's goes back to the time that there were knights in shining armor, and so they would hold the reins of the horse with their left hand, and then they
Oh.
would hold their lance with the right hand. And so that's how we used to sort of joust.
Oh, I
Whereas,
did not
yeah, I
know that.
mean,
Yeah.
that's, I don't know how true that is, but that's the sort of general thing. But, it's sort of natural to sort of keep your right hand, so you've got your right hand free against your possible opponents. So that's why we try.
Which is a great
Gotcha.
explanation too. I don't know why the people in the US were thinking of switching that, Oh, we're not going to joust that much. We'll just put it on the right.
It's strange. I mean, the reason I mean, I think it's only Japan, Australia, and the UK that actually sort of drive mainly on the well, they drive mainly that drive on the left. I mean, don't drive mainly on the left, you could have a problem.
Yeah. So in the United States, we have a lot of different birds that as you grow up, you're familiar with them in your backyard. I think that in England, I believe they call it garden birds usually instead of
Yes, yeah, that's
backyard
right.
birds.
Yes, yeah.
So a lot of those birds end up being core memories for us as we grow and we hear them singing, making noise. What are some of the birds that are very near and dear to people in the UK because they're just so familiar with them in their yard or garden?
Right. I mean, to start off with, the European robin, which I was involved with a project a few years back to try and make the robin our national bird. We have a very good bird watcher over here, a guy called David Lindo. I don't know if you may have met him. He travels. He's known as the urban
Heard of him,
bird.
yeah. I don't think we
Yeah,
met him though.
yeah.
Mm-mm.
Well, David sort of set up this national ballot to for the European robin to be actually officially crowned the national bird of the UK, and it's a fantastic bird. It's a chat. I mean, of all the American birds, I suppose you say it's a bit like the bluebird. It's a sort of similar sort of size. It's got a lovely red chest. It's not related to the American robin, which is in fact a sort of a turdus thrush. Um, they We have them in our garden. Sometimes we have one out the front and one out the back, so in our back garden and our front yard. I mean, I know you call them yards, so but we have a tree in the front, and they they're quite unusual in as much as both the male and female sing. And then in winter, we have a big influx of robins coming in from Central Europe to escape the cold weather, and they sing all through the winter. And they've got a lovely song. I'm trying to think that it's difficult to say what type of American bird they sound like. They do sound a bit sort of warblerish of some of the sort of prettier warbler songs. I mean, it's sort of very sibilant, their song, but they'll just sing for hours. And I mean, the things they do, if you're digging in the garden, and as soon as a worm comes up, they'll come down, they'll jump on the spade and just watch as you go about. So we have them in the garden. We have blackbirds, which are related to American robins. We have a lovely little bird called the dunnock, um, which is your ultimate little brown job. It's a centre. I think Siberian centres turned up in the US, certainly
I
up
think
in
that's
the
true, yeah.
yeah. So it's related to those, and they I mean the old name for them was hedge sparrow, and we have them nesting in our hedge here. Um, we've seen a massive rise in wood pigeons, which are sort of basically our equivalent of the band-tailed dove or band-tailed pigeon. They look very similar, and their numbers have gone up astronomically over the last sort of 30 years for sort of number of reasons. And then we have tits as well. So we have great tits and blue tits, and they keep on changing the scientific names, but we used to call them. They used to be Paris. The Latin word is Paris.
Yep.
So they're a bit like sort of northern parulers. I think the parula was probably a similar route for their names. And then we have the winter wren as well. That's I think that perhaps the North American winter wren. I know the Pacific wren's been split, so
Hmm.
I guess there's most probably differences between that. We have obviously European starlings, house sparrow, collard dove, which is invaded America now, and the other day we had a sparrowhawk, which is like a just a little upgrade from sharp-shinned. So then sort of I live just right on the edge of the countryside. You go out into the fields, and one of the big major sort of changes in our sort of birding and the landscape over the last few years has been the arrival of red kites. They were nearly extinct back in the 70s, and
Really?
there's been an introduction program, and they just sort of done amazingly well. I mean, sort of, there's several pairs nesting within sort of just a couple of miles, and every day they just fly around. They're great. They sort of back in medieval times they were the equivalent of vultures. They sort of scavenged the streets of London, but were sort of persecuted, nearly wiped out. And if I go into our local town, you can see them sort of coming down and sort of picking up leftovers from McDonald's and things like that.
That's
Um,
fantastic that they're back.
yeah. So yeah, that's it. I mean, sadly, the for me, the most probably the most significant factor with sort of birding in the country in the UK is the sort of the biomass of birds has declined horrifically in my lifetime. If I look back at some of the old books I have when I was a kid, and you go out there and you'd sort of, you do sort of guesstimates rather than accurate counts, but there just always seem to be so many birds. And now you just see them in ones and twos. And I mean, I went out this morning on some local hills, which is a very good sort of visible migration spot just outside my village. And I had sort of half a dozen skylarks and some meadow pipits. Um, but I bet if I'd gone over there 50 years ago, the fields would have just been you know, full of birds.
What do you think is driving that development and stuff like
Yeah,
that?
I think the major thing is the sort of the catastrophic crash of the invertebrate
Mm.
population. Um, so many birds feed even sort of seed eaters feed their fledglings on invertebrates, and I think the fact that that decline is just having a knock-on effect. And then sort of habitat is being fragmented all the time. I mean, as I said, spot that I went down to see this redback shrike recently. Um, there's a massive warehouse the size of the football stadium behind me. It's absolutely huge, big sort of food warehouse. And sort of 30, 40 years ago, it was just sort of lovely fields with streams and things like that.
Yeah, we have a similar situation going on in the United States where we still have a lot of countryside in certain areas, but you just continue to see, patch after patch after patch getting developed for new subdivisions and things like that. And to your point about the invertebrates, sometimes it's habitat that doesn't look like it's very good bird habitat, but it might be good invertebrate habitat, which
Yeah.
then provides food to the birds. So
Yeah.
we've sadly seen a massive decline because of that, because of outdoor and feral cats, because
Mm.
of window collisions, because of general pesticides and poisoning.
Yeah.
So hopefully something can be done, but it's tragic because every conversation about birds that we have always goes to the same place where what if they're gone in 50 to 100 years? What are we gonna do here to fix it? And it doesn't seem like anybody has any firm answers.
No, I mean, when I left school, high school, to go to sort of journalism college, I did my hires exams, and I one of the areas questions I asked was for a geography paper, and it was about population. And at that time, the global population was 4 billion, and today it's 8 billion. It's doubled in my sort of working lifetime. And they say that sort of fertility is going down and it's going to sort of level off, but I think they were saying that sort of 50 years ago. So it's yeah, everything is being basically impacted upon by the increasing human population.
Yeah.
Hopefully some birds will be able to deal with that, like some of them have over here, which I was gonna talk more about how we do share some birds. And a lot of that is because humans in the first place decided to bring them over to the United States with acclimatization societies. But house sparrows, very familiar over here, of course, European starling over here. You mentioned great tits. There's
Mm.
one place to get great tits in the United States that are somewhat
Wow.
naturalized. It's actually in our state because
No, wow.
a lot of them escaped back, I think it was in the 80s in Chicago, and then they took up residence in northern parts of the Midwest. So there's one city in Wisconsin you can find great tits wild, which is cool. But over
Fantastic.
yeah, it's very interesting. European goldfinch too, actually. I don't know exactly where they're from, but we have some of those as well.
And we had
Uh,
a vagrant field fair in Wisconsin this year.
that's
Really,
true.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, great
We
birds.
occasionally get some of those European birds that
Yeah.
aren't already naturalized here, which is always very exciting. But around here, since they're technically non-native, a lot of people have that negative view of house sparrows and
Yeah.
starlings because they do push out the native species. What is the view of starlings and house sparrows in the
Well,
UK? Is it
I
very, very
mean,
positive?
oh, very much so. They're both threatened birds. Their numbers have gone down quite dramatically the last 50 years. Um, I'm pretty sure they're sort of red listed as birds of conservation concern. Um, yeah, they are a concern. There was in fact a sort of big study a few years ago trying to find the cause for the decline of house sparrows. I think again it's down to the loss of the invertebrate mass. So yeah, they are very popular. I mean, I come from the East End of London, and so I don't know if you heard the expression Cockney. I was born sort of in the sound of Bow Bells, and the chirpy Cockney sparrow is something that's very dear to Londoners' hearts. So yeah, when I birded in the States, I mean, I always get accused of sort of bringing over these trash birds, but I try and explain that back in the UK, I mean, we have both house sparrows and starlings in my garden, but that's because I put a lot of bird food out for them, and you are lucky if you sort of find a reasonable number in a small roost or something like that. Yeah, it's always a good bird to see.
Starlings are gorgeous too, and they have those
Yeah.
incredible murmurations. Every time we see one of those undulating murmurations here, we just think about how amazing it must be to see that in their native habitat where you don't have this, ooh, those are going to push out native species kind of
Oh,
feeling.
And they're
yeah, I know.
amazing mimics too. I've
Yeah, I
seen
mean,
people with pet starlings and the stuff that they can do is wild.
yeah. I mean, they used to be able to sort of impersonate a certain telephone. There was a particular type of telephone that came out in the 80s, and they just sort of copied it, and they would call it, and everyone would sort of run to the telephone to find out who was ringing. Yeah, I mean, they are smart, clever birds. I mean, they unfortunately both make very good sparrowhawk food.
Mm.
Sparrowhawks did have a renaissance after they took out certain sort of dangerous chemicals out of the environment, but they're sort of, their numbers are sort of, I think, edging down at the moment. So, yeah, everything sort of, there's very few species that are really having well, I say a renaissance or boom time, but what is very interesting, and I sort of mentioned this, is that we're having a fantastic time for egrets in the
Mhm.
UK. Um, when I went bird watching in 1970 with the guy that I still go bird watching with now, my school friend John, and we've known each other since we were four. We went to a big RSPB reserve on the east coast of England, and we saw a little egret, and it was the rarest bird we'd seen, and it was the rarest bird I'd seen, for over the next decade, until I really got into sort of birding seriously. And this bird, it's a Mediterranean bird, so it sort of was nesting 1,000 miles south of the UK. And over the last sort of 50 years, it's spread north. And we've now got sort of more than 1,000 pairs nesting in the country. And hot on the trail of that, we've had cattle egrets. I know that made a big inroad into the United States. I think they jumped
Hmm.
across from Africa to sort of South America and worked up. And we've got great egrets nesting here now. Um, we've um, we've just got sort of glossy ibis. I know they're not egrets, but that seems to be something that's happening quite significantly, perhaps because of climate change. That birds are sort of coming from areas where there's sort of drought and sort of water decreasing. And those birds, wetland birds, are coming north to the UK. So that's one of the major changes on our birding landscape.
Yeah, that's similar to what we have going on in our birding landscape. Is a lot of southern birds are starting to push north more. So Carolina wren was pretty much an exclusively southern species, and now can be found way farther into the Midwest than it used to be. Even red-bellied woodpecker, northern cardinal at one point was a southern species that's worked its way up, and then those northern birds that would come down from our boreal forest aren't coming down as far or not coming down at all anymore. So you're seeing this push of the southern species up and a receding of the northern species back into Canada and the Arctic. So we'll
Right.
see what happens with that in the future if we can still find any of those birds that used to come south.
Yeah. Do you get things like evening grosbeak wintering in your part of the world?
We get them in certain places. Sometimes when there's an eruption, they'll be as far south as where we live in southern Wisconsin. But most of the time, they're going to be relegated to the northern woods of the Midwest and not come down too far, but we still do get them. They are one of those species, too, that has had that anticipated recession back into the boreal forest.
That's smart.
Their movements are really dependent on a insect called a spruce budworm. So if the
Yes, yeah.
spruce budworm is has a good population, then normally they'll come down further. And that was actually something interesting is during COVID times, they didn't go out to spray the trees for spruce budworm for trying to like, get rid of it for the pest side of it. And so that actually helped the evening grosbeak populations for a
That's
couple
cool.
years after. So we were like, maybe we just don't do that and we just let
Yeah.
the grosbeaks take care of it.
That was one of the things that was sort of postulated when we had the big fall of American birds last year, that the species that did turn up here were those that sort of bred largely on the spruce budworm, like Cape May warbler and bay-breasted warbler and things like that. But their numbers are doing quite well, I think. And yeah, sadly, we haven't got anything that's enjoying a sort of that sort of boom over here.
Yeah. Stuart, how did you get started in birding? Where did it all start for you?
Well, basically, I was as mentioned earlier, I was born in the East End of London, and I was born, sort of a good 10, 11 years after the war. But the area where we lived was badly damaged by bombing, and so there was this big shift to sort of create new housing in areas outside London. So they built a number of new towns dotted around London, and we moved up to Bedfordshire, as I mentioned, to a town called Luton, which was the headquarters of General Motors in the UK at the time. At the times we used to build cars under the Vauxhall badge, and I think it was just coming from a very heavily urbanised area into fields. I was only sort of five. Um, it was something to explore. And then I was very lucky that we had a family friend who was, in fact, our family doctor, who was one of the original, her husband was one of the early members of the RSPB. And they joined me up with the Young Ornithologist Club, as it was called, as a birthday present. So that sort of influenced me. And then as I got older, with a school friend, we would go out and explore and sort of see kestrels and go down to our local sewage works. And the other big impact was there was a very big freeze in the UK in 1963. Um, and I remember birds coming into the garden. We had a field fair come into the garden and things like that. And that was, they were the spark birds that actually got me excited. And, I sort of never looked back.
Very cool. And you've had the opportunity to bird with some incredible, like really notable people like Roger Tory Peterson, Sandy Comito, who unfortunately passed away recently, and just some really big names. What was that like? Specifically, Roger and Sandy, because unfortunately they're not with us, but
Yeah.
those are a lot of people they would dream of being able to bird with them.
It was amazing. I came over in, it was 1995, and I took part in the World Series of Birding in Cape May and
Mhm.
joined an American team there. And as part of the trip, I got in touch with Dr. Peterson's publishers and asked if I could interview him. And I was invited up to his residence in Old Lyme. And we sat down, and it was a really sort of pleasant afternoon. They brought out English tea, and I call them biscuits, you call them cookies. We sat down and chatted. And he
Agree to
told me
disagree,
about and yeah, he told me about it. I mean, he was an Anglophile. He really enjoyed sort of English things and talked about his work in the war and things like that, some of the things he did. And I told him about my very first copy. I got the European copy of his field guide. And we were talking, and I can remember a sort of, there was a hummingbird outside the window. And I birdwatched on the west coast, but this was sort of pretty new to me on the east coast. And I was sort of there was this ruby-throated hummingbird, and I was sort of looking at it, and it kept on sort of attracting me. And he said, "Let's go out and go birdwatching." We just walked through his garden. He had this fantastic wooded garden, and he just picked off the bird names. There was a sort of great crested flycatcher and the black and white warbler, and it was just sort of, I mean, it was an afternoon, but it was sort of, you were really in the presence of, yeah, a great man. So, yeah, I sort of still makes the hairs rise on the back of my neck. And then that same trip, I I went over to New Jersey and down to Cape May, but I spent a couple of days up at a place called Garrett Mountain. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but
Mhm.
it's just on. It's a fantastic. It's a volcanic plug. I think it's on the sort of very edges of the Appalachian Mountains as they sort of sweep up through New Jersey. So it's just a sort of stone's throw from Manhattan. Um, and I think the birds sort of in spring sort of coming through, and they sort of suddenly hit the sort of the urbanized area that is sort of New Jersey and New York. And they sort of just fall out on this sort of mountaintop. And Sandy was a local resident there, and with the local crew, there was a British guy there as well that was a resident. We sort of bird watched the morning there, and it was, yeah, really good warbler time. And then back in 2016, I went over to High Island in Texas, and walking down, going down, it must have been Boy Scout Woods or one of the sort of marshes just near there, and suddenly sort of Sandy had this amazing smile. I mean, and really, really, I mean, there's a great joke about sort of British teeth and American teeth, but our dental work over here is not as good as yours over there. And Sandy had this fantastic smile, and so we recognised each other, and so we had another good morning. And I was with some sort of British friends, and he was pointing out birds for us, like long-billed curlew and things like that. So, yeah, it was fantastic. And I've been lucky to sort of birdwatch with Pete Dunn at Cape May, and another great birder that I've been birding watch with in America, but he's a Brit, Julian Huff. I don't know if you know Julian.
The name
Um,
sounds familiar.
yeah, he's a real sort of ID guru, and he was at Cape May at the weekend. He was doing a talk there. So I mean, become a good friend. But we went down birding together on the down at the Rio Grande Bird Festival, and he picked up my life hook-billed kite. So that was good as well.
That's a
And
good
then,
bird.
yeah, fantastic. I mean, yeah, it was a lifer for me. And I've been lucky to meet some sort of Greg Miller as
Mhm.
well, and some. I mean, American. I mean, I think this is one of the big things about the difference between British and American birding, um, is the number of women that are really keen in birding in
Hmm.
America. I mean, the demographic is so different. It's 50-50 in the States, where it's most probably, 90% of bird watchers over here are men. And
Hmm.
so I've been sort of Shawneen Finnegan, been birding with her,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and Deborah Love, Shearwater. I've been on a couple of her pelagics, and I think if one of the questions I think you may well ask me is, what is the difference? And for me, that's the ethos of American birding is there's always a smile involved. It's serious, but there's I think it's seen as as entertainment. I think we take ourselves a bit too serious when we're birding over here. There was a great football manager in the UK called Bill Shankly who was once asked about football, and he famously said, "Football isn't a matter of life or death; it's more important than that." And I think we regard that the same as birding. It's sort of we perhaps sometimes a bit too serious. We should chill a bit more and enjoy. And when you're birding in the States, you meet people, you talk, and you share bird news, and invariably there's a joke and a smile, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, I would say in general, the community over here is super welcoming, especially at festivals like the biggest week in American birding in Ohio. You have people who they just kind of see a crowd and they're walking the boardwalk, like, hey, what is that? And like 10 birders, like, oh, it's a yellow warbler. And they're open to helping whoever's around and just trying to share that knowledge. So I feel like it is very welcoming to people of all different levels.
That's the thing your Badgerland birding really brings across. I
Thank you.
mean, as I said to you before, that it's my sort of guilty secret. Sort of go onto YouTube. There's not a football match on, or there's something on TV I don't really particularly want to watch. So I go straight on. I mean, often I go straight onto Badger Birdland when there's things that I do want to watch because I know it's going to put a smile on my face.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it. Kind of piggybacking off that, what is your least favorite and favorite thing about the British scene?
British
Travel.
birding scene.
I mean, there's lots of things about Britain. No, I think the paucity of birds and the need to travel to actually have a good bird. Although I'm retired now, I've never been as busy as I
Mm.
am today. I've got three grandchildren. I do the school runs with them. Um, take my grandson to football. Sort of. There's always things to be done. And I mean, it seemed like sort of 30 years ago, I could get up before dawn, travel off up to Norfolk, which is about 150 miles away. I mean, now I think that seems as distant to me as it would be going down to sort of like to the Rio Grande or to going to Cape May or to Point Pelee. It's just the effort to actually travel a long way to see birds. So that's the negative. I think the real positive is that the amount of groundbreaking that's going on now, the level of birding knowledge um, is immense. And I have to mention this. I think that I would the Dutch birding scene is something that's really impressed me. I've just been writing a series for one of the birdwatching magazines over here, which is Birdwatching Magazine, about the Dutch birding scene. And it's on the back of this new book that's been published, the Identification or the ID Handbook of European Birds, which is a book that sort of totally broke the mold. It's two volumes, sort of 1,000 pages, 700 species, and it really drills down into sort of the niceties of bird identification. Um, Thoroughly recommend it. But speaking to the guys who actually, the guy that wrote the book and the guy that was in charge of the photographs, I've just been totally sort of wowed by the way they're looking at birding. So I'm sort of writing this thing about I call it total birding, and can never escape football. Back in the 70s, the
Total
Dutch
Football.
football.
team
Yeah.
invented the total football. And I've sort of done this sort of parallel between total football and total birding. And for me, total birding is that being able as a birder to have all the skill sets to actually sort of have sort of use your ears, use your eyes, but to get to understand things like molt and to understand sort of how to actually find a bird, to sort of I mean, playback is very popular in Dutch birding and things like that. So And I mean, I'm sort of seeing some of these guys go out. They go out like RoboCop. They'll have, the scope, binoculars, a recorder attached to their shoulder so that it's picking up any birds flying over. They'll have a thermal imager. Um,
Yeah.
they'll have a sort of state-of-the-art camera that so that basically they'll get a photograph of the bird. And this book is fantastic. It's sort of like CSI birding, so you can take a photograph of a bird, especially if it's a rarity or something you haven't come across before, and you can go back and use the book and really do a sort of forensic analysis. And sort of, I was looking at a Harrier today that someone posted, and looking at the difference between Northern Harrier and Hen Harrier in the UK, and counting the number of bars on the sort of the eighth and ninth primary. That's sort of really real detailed stuff, and I think I've only picked that up from the Dutch. So I mean, I think that's something that's going to sort of become immersed more in British birding.
What's interesting about that too is there are some species that based on the time of year or the molt, you have to look at one of those primaries and a marking on the primary to identify. So especially gulls, those weird hybrid gulls you can get, you have to look at the
Mm.
primary sometimes. Rufus versus Allen's hummingbird, one particular feather is essentially the difference. So those fine detailed skills are necessary to really get to that next level of being able to identify some of the most difficult identifications in birding.
Yeah. And the thing is, as it happens, you then make your own discoveries, or people make their own discoveries. Because I mean, the Dutch have been really progressive in splitting their own species before they were sort of, I think, officially split. So things like water pipit and stuff like that. They've been ahead of the game, and I think that that's going back to sort of ivory goals. I mean, reading some of the groups on social media. Um, Totally confusing. I mean, you see sort of new, I think, is it Olympus Goal and sort of Cook Inlet Goal and things like that. I mean, I
Yeah,
just
there's so many gull hybrids. It's hard to keep track of them all.
no,
And
I
then
mean,
then they bleach too. So you'll get like it'll
yeah,
look all white. You'd be like, "Oh, it's a glaucous wing gull." It's like, "No, it's a bleached western gull." It's like, "Yeah, how
yeah,
how would the regular person know that?"
Stop
yeah.
bleaching your gulls.
Well, funny enough, going back, back to my county again, Bedfordshire, back in the 80s and 90s. We were going back before then. We sort of sat on chalk at one end and London clay, as it's known, and London clay is used for housing bricks. So when there was this great big urban or new town boom outside London, they excavated these massive pits out in Bedfordshire to provide the clay, the bricks. And after they sort of finished, but they filled them with London rubbish. So we had these fantastic landfill sites. And for years, we were sort of like Gold Central, inland Gold Central for the UK. And um, one of my friends who sadly is no longer with us, a guy called Martin Garner, who was, a really top birder. I mean, ahead of the field of goal identification and things like that. He would drag me around the rubbish tips, and he was sure that there was this bird that was turning up, which was a type of herring gull, and it was Pachynad's. And now that's been accepted. It's a new species of Caspian gull, as we call it, which I'm sure will turn up be the next one. It'll follow in the footsteps or the wing beats of lesser blackback gull. They're sort of regularly here now, and we see this big influx sort of post-breeding. I mean, they breed in Germany, Poland, and into Russia, but I won't be surprised that they're sort of nesting here in the next sort of 20 or 30 years, and then they'll hop over the Atlantic.
Gotcha. What is the perception of the American birding scene by people in Britain? Do you guys like what we have going on over here? Is it
Yeah.
looked down upon? What are the thoughts?
Well, there was always a suggestion that, I mean, when I, sort of, you hear sort of jokes, oh, sort of, Americans only do sort of pretty birds, or, they only do the male birds of, warblers, and they don't sort of bother looking at that. But I think that's totally unfair. I think that, unfortunately, there's a general sort of the way travel works in the UK. I think birders, if they are going to travel abroad, they'll go to Spain or they'll go down to Turkey and places like that. There hasn't been the mass flight across the Atlantic that there should be, because I think it is, I mean, for me, if you ask me tomorrow, where do I want to go birding, I would go to the States. So there's misconceptions. I think there's generally misconceptions about Americans, and I think that, that it sort of goes back to perhaps from what their grandparents. There used to be this thing about the Americans were sort of overpaid, oversexed, and over here during the war. Because I think when the GIs came across, they were a lot wealthier than our soldiers. Um, but yeah, I could only be positive about the American birding scene. I mean, I sort of, when I wrote those pieces, I was sort of very keen to sort of say, go out there and try it. I mean, it should be on every British birder's bucket list. To have to go to an area where there's sort of spring warblers coming through, whether it be High Island, Cape May, the Guy Marsh, Point Pelee. I think that's, ultimate birding really. And you would want to continue doing it. I mean, you may have seen X number of magnolia warblers in your life, but every time you see one, it sort of, just makes you feel sunny.
Yeah, some people think that our warblers are tough to identify. If you see a male, I don't think most people have issues once they kind of study it, but I've heard the British warblers are a nightmare. How
Yeah.
hard are your wood warblers to identify? Is that true?
Um,
Are people overstating that, or is it actually really,
no,
really
that
tough?
they are. I mean, the two commonest ones are the chiffchaff and willow warbler, and they're difficult. I mean, I think that it's strange that going back to forensic birding, you can sort of look at two photographs and you can sort of work out that the willow warbler's primary projection is longer than the chiffchaff's. Um, there's an imagination on the chiffchaff closed primaries. Um, the generally willow warbler has a sort of pinkish leg and the chiffchaff has a blackish leg. And their songs are very different. I mean, the chiff-chaff is on the metapaic, it says chiff-chaff, chiff-chaff, whereas the willow warbler sounds just like the canyon wren.
Hmm.
It's amazing that I mean, I'm sure that they dub either our willow warbler on American films that are filmed in Hollywood, or vice versa over here, because you hear the chord, it says that downward cadence. So easy in spring, but it takes time. But I mean, we have this expression "jizz" over here, and you can tell them on by their jizz. I always think that sort of willow warblers are sort of more arrow-like. They're more elongated, and their ends are more attenuated, whereas chiffchaffs are a bit rounder and sort of smoother. Then you get into they're Philoscopus warblers, and then we have the number of rarer Philoscopus warblers that come into the country. And I mean, we're going through a boom at the moment with Siberian ones, and they do get difficult. Um, then there's the Acrocephalus warblers, the sort of brown warblers, and we have reed, marsh, and Blythe reed. And yeah, if you can tell them when they're not singing, then you know your stuff. We, we
Yeah,
we could spend the whole evening talking about them.
I was having a flashback because we had talked to Arjen Dwarshuis, the birder from the Netherlands who broke the global big ear record, and he was
Yeah,
talking about
yeah.
his daughter, and he said he was playing her the Blythe's Reed Warbler song to try to get her to go to sleep as like a sort of lullaby.
I mean, I've been lucky to hear them up in Finland. I mean, funnily enough, that's another bird that's being affected by climate change, and the first pair bred in the UK this year up in Scotland. So that's a sort of possible invader. But they are wonderful songsters. They really, really. I mean, the marsh warbler is my favourite songbird, and or singer because it mimics so much, and you can sort of one minute you're in a bit of swallow and a bit of goldfinch, and then it comes out with things that it's heard or been programmed from its sort of African wintering grounds. and you think, God, what's it saying there? So that they are brilliant birds to hear.
Yeah.
Uh, and then we have, yeah, I mean, we could talk about warblers all night. But we have, and they keep on changing the Latin names. So we used to call them scrub warblers. They were Sylvia warblers, and now they're Curuca, I think is the correct pronunciation. And there's a few of those that are very similar as well. But
Gotcha. I wanted
yeah,
to ask real quick about the Global Bird Fair because
yeah,
I've heard about that's a really big event. Have you been to it? What's it like?
yeah. I would certainly say, please come over. You make a great show over here. It's basically it was the British Birdwatching Fair, and it's sort of been reconfigured. And it's a place called Rutland Water, which is a great place for a day's bird watching. Um, yeah, people come from all over the world. I think it's sort of 20,000 plus people come over the weekend. Um, I think I think I've been to every one, so it's sort of about 30 years. I mean, as a sort of birding journalist, it's like it's a watering hole. You go there and
Yeah.
you have conversations with people, and you see someone and you talk to them, and then you basically someone sort of say interrupts you, someone else comes in and joins in the conversation, and so you break off and you see somebody else, and then you sort of carry on the conversation 12 months later and continue what you was talking about previously. So I could see you going down a bomb there. You can make a really great
Yeah, I
show.
mean, I'd definitely love to go over to the UK at some point, and even just seeing, European robin would be a big deal. So
Yeah.
I'd probably sit there
Great
for like two
crested grebe
hours
is the
getting
one I'm
videos.
after.
Great crested grebe, yeah, another one. I mean,
Yeah.
anything really would be excited to see.
Tawny
We can
owl over there.
we can finally
Tony out. Yeah.
It's tawny owl in the UK, yeah.
Yeah, I got them. I mean, around the corner from where I live, they call.
Oh,
Yeah.
perfect.
we can
You know the
rejoice
you
in
know the
seeing
great
house
thing about.
sparrows.
Sorry.
I said we can rejoice in seeing house sparrows finally in
Oh,
their
you can
We knew
natural
it
just
was
see
gonna
them
be
habitat.
a
up.
problem.
But you know the great thing about Tornio, that they sort of call to each other. So one says to it, and the other one says to u. And great crested grebes. I mean, they're you know like 25 minutes from where I am. Um, just the thing about Great Christopher. Do you remember back in Victorian times? I guess they may have done it with American birds, but women would wear mufflers. They would wear like a feather garment that they would put around their hands. They were like gloves, but
Hmm.
they were shot great crested grebes,
Oh,
and they always become extinct because they were hunted. So, but they've done very well in recent years. So.
That's
that's
good.
good.
At least that there's a couple good conservation stories of some
Yeah,
birds that have made a recovery.
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, we got to wrap it up pretty soon here, but before we go, I want to ask if you have any advice for young birders, because I feel like there's a lot of up and coming, great younger birders, and they're always looking for advice on how to be better, how to get jobs in
yeah.
wildlife and all that.
I think first of all, I would say read. Read, yeah, there's so much information that you can get online and you can pick up from books, but read a lot of the great birding classics. Go back and read Roger Torrey Peterson's Wild America. Read some of the lovely writers, particularly in American literature about birds. Read a lot of the travelogue books out now to get that sort of vibe of enjoyment out of it. Um, then I would say the key thing is always make sure that you record what you've seen, what you've done. I mean, I've because I write for a living. Um, my logging of birds has not been as good as it is, and I think it's really important. I mean, you can put things on eBird and you can put things on Bird Track over here, which is fantastic. But get your own diaries and write what you remember about it, because I think that as you go through life. They're fantastic ways of actually sort of reinvigorating your sort of mojo when things go down. Birding is something that it's a bit like sport. You're not always on your game, and sometimes life um, deals you unfair blows. And to actually have something that you've written to go back to, I think it's really good. The other thing is make lots of friends. Always, make contacts, speak to people, always treat fellow birders with respect and courtesy. Um, Forge friendships because they're priceless, and those things can help you as you get on in life. And I think the birding community owes it to itself to be one sort of happy family as such. And I think there are things that perhaps I mean I could sort of say lots of things on a scientific basis of what you should and what you shouldn't be doing. Um, you know, Using technology and things like that. But I think it's sort of using your human skills, and most importantly of all, is sort of just enjoy birding because it's I've seen birds decline in my life, and they become as I get older, birds become more and more precious. So they've really got to value it as a currency now.
Yeah, I think those are all great tips. Ryan, anything else for Stuart?
Yeah, Stuart, where can people find your writing if they're in the United States? Where can people follow along with what you're talking about?
Unfortunately, and this is a real sort of, I don't put my stuff online. It goes into newspapers. Maybe sometime soon I'll sort of, I mean, I've got 30, I mean, next month, basically, I celebrate 30 years of writing bird columns. I've got such a massive back catalogue. I mean, I'm almost probably on par with the Beatles for the amount of articles I've got. I shouldn't have said that. I mean, the Beatles
Nope,
are.
in popularity as well. I would have to agree.
Um, but yeah, I was really sort of thinking about sort of putting it online and sort of because I mean, so many stories that I've written about, sort of an American sort of story. I mean, as I say, I've met lots of American birders. I've had lots of adventures in America, some good, some scary. So yeah, that's to await, but hopefully that will come sooner rather than later. And I'll get in touch when there's a website up.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Sounds good.
Cool. Thank you so much, Stuart.
Fantastic.
And thanks to everyone for watching this episode and listening on the Badgerland Birding Podcast.